The U.S. President Joe Biden explaining what the policy will be going forward after that G7 meeting on getting out of Afghanistan. He has said before that he wants to be out by the 31st. I was talking with Ian Bremmer, who is president at the Eurasia group, as we were just preparing to go into the news conference with the U.S. president. And he's joining me from Nantucket, Massachusetts. And Ian, I was asking you whether you were surprised that he was sticking with the August 31st deadline. But as I was listening to him, when he spoke about there being strong agreement that they finish what they're there to do in terms of getting the people out, and they've gotten tens of thousands out already by August 31st. He said it depends on the Taliban cooperating, and that the Pentagon and State Department will adjust if necessary because the risks are real. And he talked about ISIS-K also being a threat. How do we read that he might go beyond the 31st, or conversely, that he might be out before the 31st?
He's giving himself some wiggle room, clearly. But I think if you're an ally listening to that speech, and let's be clear, the only reason he had to give that speech today is because of the G7 and because of what's happening on the ground in Afghanistan right now. We haven't seen an evacuation like this, a mass evacuation since Saigon. The reason that he gave that speech, first 5 minutes of the speech, were about infrastructure in the United States. I mean, if you're Justin Trudeau listening to that, what does that tell you about Biden's focus and prioritization on Afghanistan and how he's approached and how he is responding to it? This is a speech for the American audience. It's not for the G7. And this is a policy for the Americans primarily, not the G7. And that includes the decision to leave on August 31st. That's the point here. This is not a priority for the United States. It is much more of a priority for the Europeans, who are more proximate to the refugee crisis, more proximate to the drug trade from Afghanistan, more proximate to the radical Islamic terrorism that will be birthed and exported from Afghanistan, but less of a priority for a United States that's pivoting to deal with China. That, I think, is the primary takeaway from this speech from President Biden.
But he didn't use the phrase mission accomplished, but he certainly suggested that the mission there has been accomplished, being there since 2001. And one objective, obviously, was getting bin Laden, but the other one is making sure it wasn't a basis for terrorism. I don't know how you can say that in one breath while previously saying that ISIS-K is proving to be such a threat that it may affect the date that they get out completely.
Well, ISIS-K may well affect the date they get out on the ground in Afghanistan. ISIS-K is not considered a significant threat to the national security of the United States and Americans at home. In fact, the most significant terrorist threat domestically in the U.S. today are white nationalist extremists, a very different situation than where we were back at 9/11. So I do think that the American set of goals for the war in Afghanistan have been accomplished. They were accomplished years ago, but the mission kept changing. Once the Al-Qaeda was radically degraded inside Afghanistan, and then once bin Laden was killed, that would have been a good time with the allies to end the war. The United States did not do that. Biden, as you know, when he was vice president under Obama, was strongly opposed to the surge at the time. Nonetheless, it happened. And so I'm not surprised at all. And it's a very popular policy in the United States among Democrats and Republicans to end this war. It's one of the reasons why Trump was so in favor of it, so much so that he engaged with the Taliban and didn't even negotiate, didn't include the Afghan government in those negotiations because it was meant to facilitate an exit as quickly as possible. It wasn't because Trump was worried about the allies. It wasn't because Trump was worried about Afghan stability on the ground. It turns out that Biden, much more multilateral in orientation, but his policy is not all that different.
You said that obviously he was determined to retreat from Afghanistan and sort of close the chapter on this. He made a point of saying that everyone was in agreement, that there was solidarity within the G7, but we know that countries like Germany and the UK and Italy were pushing hard to extend the deadline, and we presume Canada as well. But I guess it just goes to show who the boss is.
Well, what he said is that there was solidarity in the mission to get everybody out safely. That's true. How one affects that, there was no agreement whatsoever. And, you know, the fact is that the United States took that decision unilaterally. The Afghan policy review that the Biden administration undertook, which was quite comprehensive, to make the decision that they were going to leave by September 11th, push the May deadline that Trump had originally given. That was done unilaterally. The allies weren't included in that. So, I mean, we can have a G7 meeting, but I want to be very clear that the dynamic at this meeting today was radically different than what we saw in Cornwall a couple of months ago, when the United States was back in coordination with its G7 democratic allies. This is a very different feel for this meeting, the summit.
Indeed. Ian Bremmer, great insight, and so appreciated. Thanks very much.
Sure. Be good.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.